Hello, 8th grade. So for the next couple of weeks, we are going to be focusing on the Pythagorean theorem. And again, once again, I'm a little upset that we can't do this in person because it is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I know you've probably heard me mention it before, but so it's very important that for the Pythagorean theorem that you watch these two videos. The first video is going to be an overview of the Pythagorean theorem, and video 2 is going to talk about the converse of the Pythagorean theorem, okay? Now, in addition to the videos that are important to watch, it's also very important that you do the inquiry lab on page 409 and page 410. So that is part of your assignment for this week, but by completing that, that should give you a better understanding of the Pythagorean theorem. So right now we're going to focus on video 1, and that is discussing the Pythagorean theorem, okay? So the Pythagorean theorem says that in a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So again, once you do that inquiry lab, this will make sense with it talking about the squares. So I gave you a model. So we have a triangle here. As you can see, it is a right triangle. We are talking about right triangles when we're talking about the Pythagorean theorem. Okay. Side A and side B are considered your legs. And side C is considered the hypotenuse. Okay. Side C is the side that is always across from the right angle. So wherever your right angle is in your triangle, the side that is across from that is side C, and we refer to that side as the hypotenuse. Okay, so you just need to know that the hypotenuse is what we call the side that is across from the right angle. All right, and then in symbols, the formula for the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b are your leg lengths, and C is your hypotenuse. Side A and side B are always going to be shorter than side C, okay? So the Pythagorean theorem describes the relationship between the lengths of the legs and the hypotenuse for any right triangle. You can use the Pythagorean theorem to find the length of a side of a right triangle when you know the other two sides, okay? So the Pythagorean theorem is going to be used in triangles. More specifically, it's going to be used in right triangles. And in a right triangle, if you know at least the length of two of the sides, you can use the Pythagorean theorem to help you find the length of the third side. Okay, so now we're going to look at some examples. So what we're going to do is we're going to write an equation you could use to find the length of the missing side of each right triangle. Then find the missing length. Round to the nearest tenth if necessary. Okay, so we're going to start with our first example. All right, so we have a right triangle. We see that this is side, this is a leg, this side is a leg, and then this side is considered my hypotenuse because it's across from the right angle. Okay, and we can see that that's side C, and we know that C represents the hypotenuse. So in example 1, the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So now we're going to fill in these letters with what we know is representing them. So it doesn't matter if you use 9 or 12 for A or B, okay? I like to put them in order from least to greatest. So I'm going to say that A is 9, so this is going to be 9 squared plus, and I'm going to say that B is 12, and this is going to be 12 squared, and we're going to find out what C is, okay? So now we have to square our numbers. Remember that when you square a number, you multiply it by itself. So 9 squared is 81, 12 squared is 144, so 81 plus 144 is going to equal C squared. All right, so if I add 81 and 144 together, I get 225, and that is equal to c squared. Now, I want to find c. I know what c squared is, so in order for me to find the value of c, I have to do something. So I have c squared equals 225. Remember that we talked about earlier on in the year that if we want to undo a square, we have to take the square root of it. And since we are working with an equation, we have an equal sign. That means whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other. So to undo this square, I have to take the square root of each side. So when you take the square root of a square, that undoes the square. So the square root of c squared is c. And then the square root of 225 is 15. So side C is 15 inches long. Okay. Side C is 15 inches long. All right, let's try another one, finding the hypotenuse. So again, I have a right triangle. Remember, we can't use the Pythagorean theorem if we have anything other than a right triangle. I have leg length of 12, we'll call this A. A leg length of 16, we'll call this B. And we have C over here, which is our hypotenuse, so that's what we're trying to find. So again, the Pythagorean theorem says that A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. I'm going to replace these variables with their given amounts. So we said that A was 12, so I'm going to have 12 squared plus, we said that B was 16. So 16 squared equals C squared. All right, so 12 squared is 144, and 16 squared is 256, and that's going to equal C squared. Well, 144 plus 256 is 400. So I have C squared equals 400. All right, now, again, I have to undo the square, so I have to take the square root of it. Remember, we have an equation, so whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other side. So the square root of C squared is C, and the square root of 400 is 20. So I know that C is 20 inches long. Okay. All right, let's look at number 3. So in number 3, I have A here. So we'll call this A. This is labeled B already. So this is what I'm trying to find. This is B. Okay. And then I have 24 meters, which is my hypotenuse because it's across from the right angle. So that means this is going to be side C. So A is 8. I don't know what B is, and C is 24. So again, we're going to set up our equation. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. For A, I'm using 8. So I have 8 squared plus, I don't know what B is, so I'm going to leave that as B squared. Equals C squared. Oh, no, doesn't equal C squared. Equals, we know what C is, so we can put 24 here. Equals 24 squared. Okay, so we're going to fill in what we know. So 8 squared is 64. B squared is going to stay the same because we don't know what B is. And 24 squared is 576. Okay, so I have 64 plus B squared equals 576. So B squared is my variable, so we're going to solve this for B squared. So I'm going to subtract 64 from each side. That makes 0. That leaves me with B squared equals 576 minus 64 is 512. So I have B squared is equal to 512. And again, I have to take the square root to get B by itself. So I'm going to take the square root of each side. So the square root of B squared is B. And the square root of 512, that is not a perfect square. So when you take the square root of it, we have to round to the nearest tenth if necessary. So when we take the square root of 512, and round it to the nearest tenth, we're going to get 22.6. So B is 22.6 meters. And again, you can check your answer to see if it's right, but side A and side B, both of them should have a measure that is less than the hypotenuse. Okay, so since we got 22.6, that's less than 24. So we're good. All right, example 4. So we don't know what A is. We know that B is 20 centimeters. Oh, that's not B. What is that, guys? That's C, because it's across from the hypotenuse. So again, you have to pay attention to how your triangles are written. So that's C. And then B is 17 centimeters. So that's B. Okay, so I'm going to write my equation. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I don't know what A is. I know that B is 17 squared, and I know that C is 20 squared. Okay, so A squared stays the same. 17 squared is 289, and 20 squared is 400. So now I'm going to solve this for A squared. So I want A squared by itself, so I have to subtract 289 from each side. So I have A squared is equal to 111. So if I want A squared or A by itself, I have to take the square root of each side. So the square root of A squared is A. And the square root of 111, again, that is not a perfect square. So when you take the square root of it and round to the nearest tenth, you get 10.5. So side A was 10.5 centimeters. And if we look over here, the hypotenuse was 20 centimeters, so what we get should be less than that, and it is. So to wrap things up, the Pythagorean theorem says A squared plus B squared equals C squared, where A and B are legs and C is the hypotenuse, which is the side across from the right angle. If you have a right triangle and you know two side lengths, you can find the measure of the third side by using the Pythagorean theorem. So that's a quick wrap on the Pythagorean theorem. Just remember, it can only be used in a right triangle. The formula is A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Side A and B are legs, and side C is the hypotenuse, and it is across from the right angle. So have fun solving problems using the Pythagorean theorem.